This is my needs assessment on the homeless population in Yavapai County, Arizona. The purpose of a needs assessment is to identify the gap of resources between what is already in place and what needs to be in place in order to implement change. Identifying needs and resources that can help social workers understand how to best change and improve the situation in the most efficient way. The purpose of this needs assessment The issue. Homelessness has been an issue throughout the world for many centuries. The reasons why are loss of employment, lack of affordable housing, mental illness, substance abuse, and vulnerable people for multiple reasons. Understanding the population. Homelessness can happen to anyone because of the multiple issues, but the most vulnerable populations are veterans, recent immigrants, elderly, disabled, single mothers, adolescents, and single adult male alcoholics. Overview of the primary issues. In the past decade has seen an overall decrease in homelessness in the United States. In contrast, Yavapai County has seen a steady increase. What are the reasons? What are the current resources? And what are the needs? In this needs assessment, we will look at the data collected and the process and details of collecting it. We will look at the sample interview questions and description of participants, the key findings and results. We will review the results and suggest interventions, and in conclusion, we will reflect on what was learned and the knowledge gained from the overall experience. The data collection process. We will look at 3 homeless shelter directors, all interviewed in person, 3 distinctly different shelters. All interviews were approximately 30 to 50 minutes, and all interviews were done in person one-on-one. Homeless shelter number 1 is Coalition for Compassion and Justice, also known as Staggered Straight. The director there is Jessie Hams, who has a bachelor's degree and 1 year of experience in her current position. She also has 12 years of experience in mental health. The shelter works with every population, sober or not, and this includes registered sex offenders, so they do not service families with children. It is a not-for-profit agency funded by donations and their private thrift store. Staff are either volunteers, former shelter residents, and a few paid positions. It is a 40-bed shelter. Shelter number 2 is Stepping Stones Agency, with the director being Corey Burke. She also has a bachelor's degree, employed as the director for the past 5 years, who has 15 years of experience working in the community with all types of people. The shelter portion of the organization is only for sober women experiencing domestic violence. It is a not-for-profit organization funded by donations, their own thrift store, grants, and state funding. Staff are volunteers, former clients, and paid positions. There are 15 women and children beds, and they offer services to all homeless population. And shelter number 3 is Prescott Area Shelter Services, also known as PASS. The director there is Katie Norris, who has a bachelor's degree in nursing, has worked for 6 years as the director, but has been an RN for 7 years. The shelter is for sober women and their children that are homeless. It's a not-for-profit organization funded by donations and state funding, and the staff are volunteer, former clients, and there are a few paid positions. They have 19 total beds, including children. Each shelter were asked the following 8 questions. The qualitative data obtained. Key finding number 1. Question number 1. All 3 shelters turn away clients weekly, but for different reasons. All 3 shelters refer to each other. None of the shelters can keep a man and wife and their children together. Question number 2. Do you see a change in how many people are homeless as the seasons change? Well, shelter number 1 and 3, there's definitely an increase of people during the winter, but because of the population at shelter number 2, being that they are women of domestic violence, seeking shelter in different seasons did not occur. Question number 3 and 4. All 3 shelters surveyed were asked, where do you come from and what led to your homelessness? 90% of the clients were from Yavapai County and the rest were from other areas. Because of the many services available for the homeless population, there was some speculation that people were coming from other areas because of the services. Their reasons for homelessness varied greatly, as described earlier in the presentation. Question number 5, all 3 were asked if they felt Yavapai County was in need of another shelter, and they all stated that there is currently not a shelter that accommodates a man, his wife, and their children. So the combination of the different shelters do accommodate for that, but unfortunately it splits up the family. Shelter number 1 specifically stated the real need is for affordable housing and transitional housing. Question number 6, follow-up after discharge. All 3 shelters stated only if the client returned or contacted them was follow-up completed. Question number 7, all 3 shelters closed from 8 to 6. Question number 8, types of services. All 3 shelters offered various amounts of services, but shelter number 1 was the only one that accompanied or allowed dogs and were able to accommodate dogs. None of the shelters offered licensed therapists or social work. Recommendations. Based on the answers to the questions asked, all 3 shelters have turned away clients weekly for different reasons. None of the shelters can take man or wife and their family, so a shelter that accommodates a man, wife, and their family would be beneficial. None of the shelters had social workers or therapy staff. A licensed therapist or social worker employed at each facility might be beneficial to assist both micro and macro level interventions. None of the programs had a day program, so a day program that provides skills training would be beneficial. Recommendations continued. Shelter number 1 services the largest variety of individuals, so when the director stated that low income and transitional housing were the biggest needs, this stood out as a definite need. None of the shelters really have a plan in place to do follow-up with clients that leave the shelter, so also it is determined that a follow-up plan would be beneficial in monitoring long-term outcomes and macro-level interventions needed. In order to really understand the needs and issues when completing a needs assessment, you must get a comprehensive view on the situation. One of the key factors that made this assessment successful is that all 3 shelters were different from each other, allowing for all the different elements to be exposed. One of the barriers noted was not being able to talk to the clients to obtain their viewpoint. In conclusion, this experience will help to inspire future needs assessments when clarity is warranted in identifying interventions needed with problems faced as a social worker. Important needs and interventions towards the community of Yavapai County were gained and will be shared with each other and the shelters, and also the community collective impact team that meets monthly to discuss the homeless population. Both micro and macro level interventions were identified and will be communicated to these organizations in an effort to make a difference in Yavapai County. Thank you for listening and have a good evening.